All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark, and I'm really excited about today's episode because it's on a topic that I'm really passionate about, and it's something I never thought I'd be able to dedicate an entire podcast episode to, and that is Star Wars canon novels, and why I think they've been the most consistent form of Star Wars under Disney. Now, that might be a crazy claim, but when I think about all the TV shows, all the movies that we've gotten under Disney, it feels like for every good one we get a bad one or two underwhelming ones. And this is not to say that Star Wars canon novels have not fallen into the Disneyfication trap. There are plenty of books that have come out just to sell merchandise or experiences, especially Princess and the Scoundrel, which was selling the Galactic Star Cruiser that just closed down in the Disney parks. Or there are books that are solely written just to explain away all of the inconsistencies and try to piece together the issues that are apparent in the sequel trilogy, like Shadows of the Sith or any of the timeline novels. And I don't blame any of the authors here. I think they do their best with the material that they're given. But this is all to say that I think these books are very obvious cash grabs that most people can see through and usually ignore when it comes to canon novels. But on the other side of this spectrum, we have these fantastic character study books that look at characters that we know and love and analyze them from a whole new perspective and really allow us to get inside their head like a movie or a TV show never could allow us to. And then aside from legacy characters, there are so many rich new stories being told in Star Wars canon novels, especially the High Republic, which I really love, or new characters in familiar places like the original trilogy or in the sequels or the time between the sequels and the original trilogy. And doing all of these different things while also respecting the source material, respecting the themes that were established by George Lucas and all of his films. I truly believe that some of these Disney canon novels are some of the richest pieces of Star Wars storytelling we have. And I think it's unfortunate that a majority of Star Wars fans aren't aware of them or haven't been exposed to these stories. And that's really the motivation behind me making this episode, because I'm far from a bookworm. I've never been a big reader. I enjoy reading, but I've never been someone to bang out a book in a week. So trust me, I'm just as surprised as you that I'm about to make an entire episode dedicated to books. And I really owe a lot of my love for reading to Star Wars canon novels because they're all I read now, and they really had a tough job to do because when I was introduced to them and I dove into them, if they weren't great, then I probably wouldn't be that big of a reader. So that is also a testament to them that they made a non-reader become someone that looks forward to book releases now. Again, something I thought I'd never say. And something I've kind of discovered over the years of having this podcast and doing the book reviews on the Instagram page is that I originally started this podcast to get rid of some of that toxicity in the Star Wars fandom and give objective opinions on Star Wars, the good, the bad, and be totally in the middle. Be the balance. See the dark side and see the light side in each of these pieces of Star Wars property that we were getting nowadays. But I've come to realize another piece of this podcast that I absolutely love and I think is even more rewarding than my original goal is exposing people that are casual Star Wars fans or even huge Star Wars fans, but they haven't seen all the different corners of the Star Wars galaxy. When my friends tell me that they started watching Clone Wars because I talk about it on this podcast, or I give them the Clone Wars Excel sheet that gets rid of all the filler episodes, or friends that are starting to watch Rebels because they're excited about Ahsoka, but they also hear me talk about Rebels in such a great light. That's so rewarding because I think there are so many Star Wars stories that are out there that people just aren't aware of. And if I can get someone that's a casual fan or a diehard fan to dive deeper into Star Wars, that's such a big win for me because I think it is totally worth it. And I think books are kind of my final frontier to expose people to. TV shows and movies are much easier to convince people to get into, but books are a huge time commitment. And to be honest, a lot of people aren't big readers. So it's a big ask to try and get someone into a novel that's 400 pages long. But my goal is to tell you guys that it is worth it. I started doing the book post on the Instagram page, and I try and be as high level as I can because I don't want to give away the story. but I also want to give people little tidbits to latch onto. Like, for example, with Alphabet Squadron, I really enjoyed the book, but it's not one of my favorites. But I made sure to emphasize that if you are a huge fan of dogfights and space combat and the pilot's life of Star Wars, this book might really get you in to Star Wars novels. With Path of Deceit from the High Republic, you might not be a huge fan of the High Republic. You don't really want to go into all that lore. But if you're into a cult novel that explores like cults in Star Wars, I wanted to emphasize that. Maybe that'll get you hooked to Star Wars books. So those posts, as much as they're a review for me, I also wanted to tailor them to you guys so that you would read them and hopefully say, oh, I want to get into Star Wars books. I also include the favorite quotes in there because maybe those quotes will speak to you like they spoke to me when I read it. So with this episode, my hope is that you guys listen, hear me talk about my favorite Star Wars novels, hear some of my recommendations on where you should start, and that you go pick up a Star Wars book because of it, or you buy an audiobook and listen to it on your commute to work or while you're making dinner. I feel like a first grade teacher right now at the Scholastic Book Fair, but really, I am passionate about Star Wars canon novels because I think these stories that I'm going to talk about today are some of my favorite stories in all of Star Wars, and I've seen all of the visual media we've got in Star Wars. I've played most of the video games we've gotten in Star Wars, and although I haven't read all of the Disney canon novels that have been released over the years, I think it's about 100 at this point, I do think I have a good idea of the quality that is put out there by Disney Publishing. And I definitely know for a fact that some books that I haven't picked up have gotten great reviews, and people seem to love them. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is you really can't go wrong with any Star Wars canon novel you pick up with Disney with a little bit of guidance and you following what you think is most interesting in the Star Wars galaxy. And that's why I personally think it is the most consistent form of Star Wars under Disney, because anything you pick up that you're interested in, whether it be a book about Leia, a book about pilots, a book about Jedi, you will likely get greeted with a great Star Wars experience. So with that all being said, that long intro, I think all of that was very important to set the stage for this, but I'm essentially going to take you guys through my top 5 favorite Star Wars canon novels, give you a couple honorable mentions, and give you a synopsis on each of these stories, give you a little bit more depth and dive into why I love them without giving anything away. And hopefully one of these books jumps out at you and you finish this episode and you start your journey with Star Wars novels. Or if you've already been introduced to Star Wars novels and maybe you've read one or two, but you didn't know where to go next because there are so many Star Wars novels out there, you hear these and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I want to go there next, or I want to go here next. So really hope you guys enjoy this episode. I hope you can feel the passion that I have for this subject as an avid book reader. I'm a very learned person. I have my study, I have my library in my apartment. It's quite fantastic. I would love to host a book party and have a fireplace and tea and crumpets and cognac after dinner. Sorry, I'll get into the books now. So I think it's only right that I start this list at number 5 with my favorite Star Wars author, Claudia Gray, and her book, Master and Apprentice. Claudia Gray needs no introduction. I think she is one of the best, if not the best, Star Wars storytelling mind out there today, right behind Dave Filoni. And in some cases, I think she surpasses Dave Filoni. Claudia has an excellent understanding of the themes of Star Wars and the events and canon history of Star Wars. So she's able to not only respect those things, but also add to them. I think where she excels the most in this arena is with character voice. She's able to match the characters that we know and love and we've seen on screen so well in the book form that it's so easy to hear these characters talking in the voices of the actors that played them. But this doesn't confine her novels to just legacy characters. She's able to create brand new stories because she does understand the world and the themes so well. So she's extremely versatile. So just wanted to get that out there because you're going to be hearing her name a lot in this list. Spoiler, 3 of her books are in my top 5. So back to Master and Apprentice, and this story is revolving around Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's relationship before the Phantom Menace, and they go on a mission together. And while the mission itself isn't very consequential, it's essentially going to this world that is ruled by a corporation, and there's essentially this power struggle between the corporation and the monarchy. And Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon are there to be peacekeepers, the original purpose of the Jedi, to be diplomats and be peacekeepers in these kinds of situations. And why I love this novel so much is because we get to dive into not only Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's relationship more than we've ever seen outside of Phantom Menace, but we also dive into a younger Obi-Wan, a rebellious Obi-Wan. We see why he becomes subservient to the council. We see why Qui-Gon is so interested in the Chosen One prophecy because of Count Dooku before him. And the way their relationship organically evolves in this novel is just so fantastic to go through, and it has time to breathe more than it's ever had in any of the other visual forms that we've seen in Phantom Menace and their brief discussions in Clone Wars and the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. I mean, Qui-Gon is a huge standout in this, and I think it's a really cool concept to explore Count Dooku's lineage of apprentices. It goes from him to his apprentice before Qui-Gon, and then to Qui-Gon, and then Qui-Gon essentially passes that off to Obi-Wan. So Obi-Wan is kind of in this interesting place where he's almost pseudo-taught by Count Dooku, and Obi-Wan ends up becoming also a servant to the Chosen One prophecy, and he passes that along to Anakin, and we see how that turns out, unfortunately. And we kind of get insights into the Jedi Council starting to fail the Republic. We have this planet that has a corporation that knowingly uses slavery, and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are unable to do anything about it because it's essentially not in the Jedi's realm. And you see that friction between Qui-Gon and the Jedi Council. Again, building on this great character of Qui-Gon and why people love him and why he's that shining example of what a Jedi should be and how the Jedi are losing their way before the fall of the Republic. So overall, while this novel's main plot thread might not be the most consequential, I think it explores all of the great themes of Star Wars, and it has a lot of consequence into the events that happen after it because of Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Count Dooku, that whole lineage of master and apprentice. The next book on my list is an unfinished Clone Wars arc that essentially got adapted into a novel because Disney canceled Clone Wars and they were unable to finish this arc, but they had, I think, basically an entire script laid out for it. So they adapted it into a novel, and it is called Dark Disciple by Christie Golden. This is the story of Asajj Ventress and Quinlan Vos essentially teaming up to take down Count Dooku by the order of the Jedi Council. So the main driving force of this novel is continuing Ventress's arc that we saw her begin at the end of Clone Wars, of her redemption away from being Count Dooku's servant. And we see her struggle with that. And then we add Quinlan Vos to the mix, who is this eccentric Jedi, but also very caring. And you see a relationship form between them. And it's really touching. It's really well written. And there are some huge twists and turns that happen later in the novel that I wasn't expecting, and I was blown away by the ending. And I think a really big piece of this story is the fact that the Jedi are ordering an assassination of Count Dooku. And that's pretty concerning when you think about what the Jedi are supposed to be. Of course, it might be for the right reason. The Clone Wars are still going on because of Count Dooku, but you have to think in the back of your head, is this really the Jedi way? And Obi-Wan acts as this middleman between the Council and Quinlan because he has this relationship with Quinlan. So when Quinlan goes out on this dangerous mission, Obi-Wan is his primary contact. And you see Obi-Wan go through a little arc here as well. Like, is the Council really going through with this? So again, that adds to Obi-Wan's character in Revenge of the Sith. And again, like I said, Quinlan gets to be built out so much more than what we got in the Clone Wars. He was just kind of the charismatic Tarzan kind of Jedi, but here we really get to dive into who he is and why he is like that. And again, like I said, Asajj Ventress really steals the show here. She becomes one of my favorite characters because of this novel. And unfortunately, with the Clone Wars, we never got to finish her arc, but here it is on full display. It's beautiful, and I really, really hope with the next season of Tales of the Jedi, they're able to animate this because they do have concept art. They do have rough animations for this already. And I really hope that they put it on screen because I want people to experience this. And if they don't experience it in the novel form, which I hope you do, they can experience it in the Clone Wars fashion, which will be fantastic if it does ever come out. So for my 3 spot, I am going to cheat here, and I'm going to say Bloodline and Leia, Princess of Alderaan as one book, because they're essentially 2 stories for Leia at 2 different parts of her life, but they're both such pivotal moments for her, and they're both written by Claudia Gray. So they're this fantastic 1-2 punch of Leia's life story outside of the films. And I really think Claudia, of all of her novels and all of the characters that she's written, I think her understanding and her portrayal of Leia in these 2 books is spot on, and you can hear Carrie Fisher's voice in your head as you're reading these novels because the voice is so perfect. If you didn't love Leia already from the movies, you will immediately see her as your favorite character in Star Wars after reading these 2 books, because Leia, Princess of Alderaan explores Leia as a teenager in the kind of junior Imperial Senator Academy, where she's able to meet with other younger senators from these different powerful worlds, and they're not full-on senators yet, but they're basically learning the ropes to become a full-on senator in the Imperial government, which is really interesting. And we have this great internal conflict for Leia because she's kind of been told that this is her life, that she has to become a princess, that she has to become part of politics. And that's not really her, but she's never thought about it that way. She's kind of always just accepted that life. And when she's finally exposed to the outside world and other people, she says, is this really the life I want? I want to help people. I'm caring, but I'm also adventurous. I'm also a Skywalker, but she doesn't know that. So this causes some contention between her and her parents, her adoptive parents, Bail and Bria. And it's a fantastic personal book about their relationship. And we also see a love interest for Leia as a young teenager. And again, that adds to her story later in the original trilogy with Han. So I think Princess of Alderaan is such a great and easy read. I think it's 400 pages, but you could still just breeze through it because it's written so well with, every one of Claudia Gray's novels are going to be written well. And the other book is called Bloodline. And this is going to see Leia after Return of the Jedi. I think it's 5 or 6 years after Return of the Jedi. And she's basically in the New Republic government as a senator. And it's really a novel about putting together the pieces of a galaxy without the Empire now. And we see that there are senators that really miss the order that the Empire brought, the centralists. And then there's the populace who want the governments of the different worlds to kind of govern themselves, have that central body, but not have as much power over, the Outer Rim or all the worlds themselves. So it's a very politically complex novel, but we also see a very personal story for Leia where she is beginning to come to grips with who her true father was. A lot of the quiet moments in this novel are Leia reflecting on Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker. And again, this lens into Leia is so interesting and unique and something we've never seen before. It's almost not even discussed that Darth Vader is Leia's father in any of the sequels or anything like that. So getting to see her come to grips with that and realizing what an evil man he was, but, starting to evolve her way of thinking around it is so impactful as a huge Star Wars fan. And I think anyone could get into it and be like, wow, this is a great look at Leia. We also see Leia and Han's relationship explored as well, and that's really touching, and I think it's a great piece of the novel as well. We also get a great new character with Leia in the Senate on the opposing side, and his name is Ransom Casterfo. I think that's his name, but Claudia Gray essentially said that he is Tom Hiddleston. That's basically what she said. So having that image in your mind and then reading in that voice, it really is a fantastic character. So charismatic, so complex because he loves the Empire and what they stood for, but he didn't necessarily love Darth Vader and Palpatine. So again, it adds this new perspective to people that were in support of the Empire. And he has a fantastic arc in this book, and him and Leia have this great banter throughout. And it's really just a fantastic novel, and it does give us the breadcrumbs to how the First Order comes about. So again, not the biggest fan of the sequels, but I think this book does a great job of explaining how the First Order could rise up out of the ashes of the Empire. So I think this 1-2 punch of Leia, the Princess of Alderaan, and Bloodline is well worth your time if you've ever wanted more from Leia and you weren't sure if the books do a good job of recreating her. Yes, they do, and they add so much to her that I think you'll love. So definitely recommend those two books. And coming in at the number 2 spot, a book that had such huge expectations and it had to perform well if this new era of Star Wars was going to work. And the book surpassed any expectations I could have had. It is grand, it's galaxy spanning, it's dark, it's hopeful, and it is so worth your time. This book is the first book in the High Republic era of Star Wars, and it is called Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule. This book kicks you in the teeth right away and continues to kick your teeth in throughout its 400-page run. It is disaster after disaster, but in every moment of death, destruction, you are faced with this unwavering feeling of hope. And it's not just coming from the amazing Jedi of the era, it's also coming from everyday people who make sacrifices to save others. And that is just a consistent theme throughout this novel of sacrifice and new hope being born of that sacrifice. There are so many characters in this novel. It's all over the place, but I think it balances it so well by making you care about each and every one of them when they do shine the spotlight on them. And we also get this brand new cast of villains who are mysterious, but also give you that very pirate-like, gritty feeling of bounty hunters and the scum of the galaxy. They're called the Nihil, I've heard. Regardless, they take advantage of the disaster around the galaxy, and I think they're a perfect foil to the Republic at the time and the Jedi. And I really just don't want to keep going because I feel like I will give away the novel the more I talk about it, but you're introduced to Jedi Masters, Padawans, everyday scientists, everyday pilots or workers. You're introduced to this band of pirates. It's as grand of a novel as you can imagine. And while some people might find it overwhelming that there's so many characters and so many things going on, but I absolutely fell in love with the darker tone, but still having that immense feeling of hope that all Star Wars should give you throughout all of it. So if you want to get into the High Republic, I, of course, have been recommending it for so long, but if you dive in with this book, I really think it'll be hard to not be hooked because I think it is a fantastic opener, and I cannot wait for Phase 3 because I believe Charles Soule is going to be writing another novel to end it or begin it. Regardless, I'm excited to see what he does in the next phase, but Light of the Jedi is exactly what the High Republic needed to start out with, and it's one of my favorite novels because of it. So before I give you guys my number 1 pick, I do want to start with some honorable mentions on some novels that are just outside my top 5, and they gave me a lot of the same feelings that these books that I've already mentioned did as well, but they just didn't do enough to crack my top 5. So I'll start with the first book in the new Thrawn saga, essentially, because there are now 6 new canon Thrawn books. This is the first one that was ever released, and it talks about the time when Thrawn initially joins the Empire. And this is obviously by Timothy Zahn. And what I really enjoy about this book compared to all of the other Thrawn novels, because I did read the trilogy that this one starts off with. I started the other trilogy, which is a prequel to Thrawn being all the way back in the unknown regions inside the Chiss Ascendancy. I didn't finish that one, but I did finish this trilogy. And why I picked this book out of the entire trilogy, because I think Thrawn is the most dynamic here. We see him be ambitious and climb the ladder within the Imperial Navy. He obviously has a much tougher time climbing the ranks because the Imperials do not take kindly to aliens being among their ranks. They're xenophobic. So we see him deal with that, but him being so good as a battle tactician, even in the lowest ranks, that he is undeniable and he has to move up the ranks. And of course, this brings in a layer of Palpatine and what he sees in Thrawn and why their goals, while they're different, they're kind of aligned. It's kind of the keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. So that dynamic is really cool. And I think the heart of this novel is Thrawn and Eli Vanto, who is a ensign in the Imperial Navy. Essentially, they come in at the same rank because he's much younger, but Thrawn needs to start at the bottom. And they have a really interesting relationship where he's an alien, but they need to look out for each other, and he is using Eli to a degree, but he's also trying to make Eli a better tactician himself and a better soldier. So I think that's really cool as well. So I think just this one, Thrawn isn't at the top yet like the other two books. So I enjoy that he's kind of in the trenches here and he's rising up through the ranks. So that's why I have it here. The only thing that I don't like about Thrawn books very much and why I probably haven't finished the other trilogy is the fact that they're very detailed. Timothy Zahn is a very detailed writer, and I know a lot of people enjoy that. But for me, sometimes in these novels, he will go off on tangents with other characters that I don't really care about. I just want to get back to Thrawn or the main conflict, and I feel like sometimes he spends a little too much time on those other characters. So that's why these Thrawn novels don't really crack my top 5, but I do think the first trilogy is well worth the read, and I think the first one, if you can dive into this one and enjoy it, I think you would enjoy the other two as well. But definitely, I would recommend this one over the prequel one. The next two honorable mentions come from the High Republic era, Phase 1 and Phase 2. For Phase 1, Rising Storm by Cavan Scott is the follow-up to Light of the Jedi. Obviously, huge shoes to fill for me because I loved Light of the Jedi so much. And Rising Storm, he reaches those heights, and I think it's a much more personal novel. It dives into a specific Jedi Master and his struggles, while also still touching on a lot of the characters that were introduced in the previous novel. I just think for this novel, it didn't span the galaxy as much. It really focused on like one or two events, which is totally fine. I don't expect every book to be the Light of the Jedi, which is this huge, sweeping epic. But I do really enjoy this novel. I think, again, it has that sacrifice and hope theme that was in the original Light of the Jedi. So I really latched onto that here. I think it is a little bit more personal in some aspects. And I think it's a great sequel to Light of the Jedi. So if you are getting into the High Republic, the first 1-2 punch of Light of the Jedi and Rising Storm should really do the trick to get you guys excited about more High Republic. So definitely recommend those two books to start out. And the next book is a little bit harder to talk about because it's in Phase 2 of the High Republic. It is Cataclysm by Lydia King. It's the second to last novel in Phase 2, so I don't want to give anything away about the storyline because anything I give up kind of gives away Path of Deceit and Convergence, but this is a really cool novel because I enjoy the cast of characters here. We have monarchs, we have Padawans, we have politicians, we have familiar faces like Yaddle and Yoda. It's a very cool cast of characters, and I think it's very personal. I think it's my favorite cast of characters because I think all of them stuck out and were all really well written. And I think in other pieces of Star Wars, there might be some characters you don't care as much about. So when the book shifts to them, you're like, oh, I don't really want to read this. But here, every time it switched, I was like, yes, okay, I want to hear where their story goes. Okay, yes, I want to hear where their story goes. And I think it all comes together and culminates in a really amazing battle sequence. And it does what the High Republic does best. And it's brutal, but also hopeful in the end. So this one really saved Phase 2 for me, so I did want to call it out here. Okay, so for my number one spot, I think a lot of people that are aware of Star Wars novels and are here just to hear me talk about Star Wars novels, I think you guys already know what I'm about to say, but this book needs no introduction. I think most people would say that this is one of, if not the strongest book in the new Disney canon Star Wars novels. And it's the first Star Wars book I read through, so there's already that piece of nostalgia and attachment to this book because it is why I was able to read all the rest of these books, because this one hooked me to Star Wars novelizations. And this is Lost Stars by the Queen herself, Claudia Gray. At its most basic, Lost Stars is a Romeo and Juliet story set in the Star Wars galaxy. But it's so much more than that because it not only explores the two main characters, but it also explores the time period and what it means to be a part of the Empire, what it means to be a part of the rebellion, and what it means to have your beliefs changed and changing for someone else. The basis of the story is two childhood best friends, a girl and a boy, who grow up on a backwater planet, and they both want to be pilots. So they both join the Imperial Academy, and they both train to be pilots, and they're both very skilled. And eventually, as the story unfolds, you see that one chooses the Empire's path and one chooses the Rebellion's path. And that tension, that emotional friction between those two as they both go in rapidly diverging paths brings so much drama and investment into this novel. that you get hooked and you immediately want to get to the next chapter. And it's a really impressive love story. It's not very contrived. It's not like anything you would expect out of like a rom-com set in Star Wars. Like, it's very well written. You care about both these characters. You care about their relationship, and it comes off very authentically. And it's so well worth your time. It's a one-off novel, so it's not like this is a part of anything else. You can just read this, enjoy it, open, shut. You've got the story, which I appreciate about it. And another aspect of this is, like I said, you get to see the perspective of people that join the Empire for different reasons. You know, you have people joining to be pilots. Like, that is the only viable way to become a pilot if you're poor. And you get this opportunity, and you're like, this Empire, while I don't know all the things they're doing, they're giving me this opportunity. And when you're inside the belly of the beast, sometimes it's hard to tell that you're a part of that machine and that you're a part of what's making that machine go. And as characters start to realize that, it starts to add a new perspective to the Empire. I think Andor gave that to a larger audience, with people seeing that people in the Empire are normal people, but Lost Stars was really the first one to allow us to see that insight. And it's really interesting because I read this book before Andor had come out. So I was exposed to this early on, and I was like, wow, this is a great new perspective. And of course, we have the Death Star and all of these other things that people have different opinions about. And again, this is where Claudia shines, where she's able to weave these stories within events that we've already seen in the movies, but doesn't take away anything from the events. It only adds to the experience of the movies or the TV shows. You're like, wow, I am now seeing A New Hope in a whole new way. Oh, I'm seeing Empire Strikes Back in a whole new way. And that's what novels should do. They should expand the lore, the canon, the understanding of these characters without fundamentally changing anything, which is, you know, also a crutch because they sometimes can't tell the most unique and original story. Of course, the High Republic can, but some of the novels in here, they're a bit constrained to these boundaries. But I think, again, she's able to do it so well. So in closing, if you want a novel that combines everything that makes Star Wars canon books great, the opportunity to tell new stories with new characters, seeing new perspectives on the same events that we've already witnessed, and weaving in interactions with characters we definitely already know, and they're just kind of visitors in the story. And by the end, you get a really satisfying ending. So if you want to dive into Star Wars novels like I did, I think Lost Stars is a great starting point because it's not connected to anything per se. It's its own self-contained story. So you can dive in and you can get a complete story. And if you like it, you can expand. But if you don't like it, then you don't miss out on anything. It's not like if you read Light of the Jedi and you didn't like it and you don't want to continue reading it, you're like, oh, well, it doesn't end on a conventional ending. There's kind of a cliffhanger and you have to go to the next book to read it. This is a self-contained story. So this is my top 5 and my honorable mentions. This has been a really fun episode to record. I did not think I'd be able to talk about novels and books for so long and so in depth without giving away any spoilers. I think I'm really proud of myself for getting these synopsises across that I came up with without spoiling anything, and I hope that they were deep enough for you guys to hear what the story has to offer for you, the value that it brings to Star Wars, and that it inspires you, again, to go pick up a book. And if this inspires a couple listeners to get into Star Wars books, then that's like the biggest compliment to me, because I want people to experience all that Star Wars has to offer. And if you do, please let me know where you start your journey, what books you're reading, because I don't have that many people to talk about Star Wars books with. That's the sad truth. I do not, and I wish I had more. So this is very cathartic for me to talk about Star Wars novels because I've never really got to do that. So thank you guys again for listening. Really appreciate the support. If you like the podcast, please rate it, subscribe, click the notification button so you know when these episodes are released. And of course, follow on Instagram to get in touch with me at @star_wars_mark of balance. Thank you guys as always for listening. Happy reading. Stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you. Peace.